right, it is Friday night. The Skeptical Help Bar is open once again, and it's gonna get a little twisted. We're gonna have fun tonight. I am excited about tonight's guest. We have a cool topic. It's definitely not a paranormal topic. So, and I told you guys at the beginning of the year, I'm trying to expand and getting into more topics, not just paranormal stuff. So I'm excited about tonight, and we're going to learn. We're going to learn. I'm going to learn. You're going to learn. We're all going to learn a little bit, and we're all going to drink a little bit too. But we have to go over the rules first. Absolutely have to go over the rules. I have to find the rules first. There they are. Okay, so rule number one for everyone that is not a local, which most of you are welcome to ask questions. And being tonight we have a guest, those questions, if you don't mind, you can ask them during the whole interview, but we're going to save the questions till the second half. I'll get into that a little bit more later. Rule number two is that I don't know everything, and my guest might not know everything either, and that's okay. This is a learning show. If we don't know, we'll look it up, or we'll write down in the trusty notebook here, and we'll get back to you. I hit the mic. That's what happens when I'm here by myself, and I'm trying to organize. Rule number 3, we follow the Patrick Swayze rule here, and that means that you can be in the chat room and you can debate, you can discuss, you can talk, you can do pretty much anything you want within reason. But if it gets too rowdy and out of hand, you start name calling stuff, we will boot you. And Donna is not here tonight. She totally bailed on me because she had free tickets to the Eagles game. So she's at the Eagles game. But in the background is Mr. Tim Vickers. He agreed. He came on to help me out tonight. So he has the power. He will boot you if you get out of line. So you're warned. You'll get vickered. Rule number 4 is if you do have a question, please put a Q in front of it. That way it helps Tim in the background pick it out and save it for the second half of the show. And then rule number 5, which is my favorite rule of all time, is to drink up. And we're definitely going to do that tonight. Let's see. I also want to say hi to a bunch of people. Oh my goodness, there's so many people. Rob Palmer, Melissa, Diane, Robert, Tiffany, Vickers is in the house again. John Kennedy, what's up? John Michael, John without an H. JD, Jade Kitten, Cindy Lee, Sandra. Oh, wow, we got a whole bunch. Jim, Dr. Jim is here. There's a lot of people. Tiffany, something to squatch about. Oh, I love that name. That's pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get into our guest because I want to get into this topic and have some fun. So let me put up my special guest frame and then bring on Adrienne Hill. Wait a minute. Here we go. Wait. There we go. Hello. Oh, your mic is muted.
Just realized that. There we go.
There we go. All right. I do it all the time. I mean, I usually do it on Saturday nights with Tim and Dave, and they jump on me. Like, oh, your mic's muted. I'm like, oh, I said something really cool. Now it's lost.
Of course.
How you doing?
I am actually doing really well. Just recovered from COVID of all things. It was not. Yeah. I mean, it was okay, but my youngest son, has had a hard time. So it's not good.
So, are you vaccinated?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay.
We were scheduled for our 4th, so our second booster.
Right.
Thank you. Our second booster, but then we got COVID instead. So there you go.
Okay.
A week before.
It wasn't too bad for you?
No, it wasn't that bad. In fact, I was very worried because my mom and dad were visiting, and we picked it up at a golf tournament my mom and I play in every year, except for 2020, of course. And my mom's, of course, in her 80s, and my dad is as well. And so I was very worried about them. But they did, because they're older, they got their 4th booster. They just opened it up in Canada to all of us minions. So they had their 4th booster, and they were fine. I mean, they certainly didn't feel great, but it was more like a mild cold, like what you said. But I was very concerned because of their age.
Right.
And then so it's ironic that the youngest had the hardest time, and he also has the 3 shots, right? So. Okay. Yeah. But he ended up with a secondary infection. He had mild pneumonia and a sinus infection and an eye infection. The poor guy.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, so he was on antibiotics as of Tuesday, and today he's been back to work yesterday and today. So it's amazing the difference.
Awesome.
So, yay science!
Yeah, yay! Yay science! All right, so briefly, like for people that don't know who you are, I mean, I put up your bio. When I ask guests for a short bio, they usually give me just a bio, and it's just about them. And you're the first one that actually included like grab a drink and join us. I'm like, yes, that's the spirit of this show. That's awesome.
Well, I had to follow your format, right? It's
Here you
so
go.
important.
I like so. I actually want to incorporate a description. When I did Skeptical conference a couple weeks ago, Carolyn, one of the people that got me into a speaker position there, she introduced me, and she gave this description of the Skeptical Hop Bar as like a good discussion in the atmosphere of your local bar, or something. She actually said it much better, and I was like, that was
perfect.
Awesome. I've never used that. Yeah, I'm gonna steal that. I'm totally stealing that. So I do like it. So and because I'm a comic book nerd, I do always ask, the first question for every guest is, what's your origin story? Because everyone has a, either a good or evil origin story. So what's your origin? How did you get where you are right now in that awesome studio you have?
Yeah. So that's an interesting story. It actually started with a car accident with my oldest son. He was in a very serious accident, T-boned. He was fine, but destroyed the car. So we needed a new car in a hurry. And we wanted to get him to drive right away. And the only place we could find a car, this was 2000, I'm going to say 13, but it might be 15. It's like way back. And we said, can you drive us we want to get you back into the car. Can you drive us? And he said, but yes, I'll drive, but only if you listen to the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. All the way there and all the way back.
Nice.
He talked about it before, but I wasn't listening to podcasts. I mean, he also originally bought me Richard Wiseman's 59 Seconds, it's called.
Yeah, I have that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was an early, but I didn't know who Richard Wiseman was. I just thought the book was really good. And another one, which was The Myth of Homework. And I can't remember the author's name. I'm sorry, whoever you are. But it was also a very good book and very skeptical about studies. Or it's called The Homework. Oh, hold on. I've got it up there. The Homework Myth, it's called.
Homework Myth by
Ellie
Cohen?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And so this is quite a long time ago. So I'd read those two books that he had given me, and then got inundated with The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe for, I think it was 6 hours, because it was a 3-hour drive there and a 3-hour drive back to get this vehicle. And I was hooked. And I started reading Steve Novella's Neurologica blog. I got into science-based medicine. And then through science-based medicine, David Gorski wrote an article about, the thing is, Gary Null is his first name. Gary Null. And it was an article called The Null Hypothesis. So Gary Null is apparently, and I didn't know this at the time, very into selling supplements. Lots of kind of fake medicine stuff. And, and and Susan Gerbic was brought up because apparently she had written about him. And David Gorski, of course, wrote about him all the time. And there's this woman being described who does this Wikipedia project called Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia. And the way it was written sounded really fun. And he had copied from her website sort of their whole idea. And the writing was really, as I say, kind of fun. So it appealed to me. So I reached out to her organization, About Time. And within 45 minutes, I had an email directly from her, because I was imagining this organization, right? And here's Susan.
Big corporate thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was very surprised to get this email from her, and so enthusiastic, laughing so hard, like, oh, isn't it awesome that Gary Null brought me an editor, that kind of thing. So that was the start of that journey. And through her, after the pandemic started, of course, I became a GSoW editor. And actually, my first project was Haunted House. So it's right up your alley.
Yes.
And
Awesome.
one of my later ones, if you remember, was spirit photography. So
Yes.
it's one of my favorites.
That's
And
how I think we got connected, because you reached out, I think, and I was like, oh, yeah.
Susan, the Energizer bunny that she is, she connected us. She connected me with you and Ben Radford, because you guys are the people who I was pulling a lot of information from. Not just you guys, but you also helped with resources, other people who have written stuff, and so it was really good. And she she did put us in touch. And then when the pandemic hit, she started that trivia game, that happens every Tuesday.
Yes.
And I started going to those trivia games, and she was attracting some names that I knew. And one of them was Richard Saunders. And I ended up on his team a couple times. And then he made an announcement, I believe it was at trivia, saying, hey, anyone want to volunteer for the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project? We need people to look up whether or not these predictions came true. So I joined that. And so that's how I got to know Richard Saunders a lot better. First from of course, the trivia. Trivia. And then through the Psychic Prediction Project.
Okay.
Also, I did a talk about Tourette Syndrome, I believe it was, at a skeptic camp that Susan held out of the one that she holds at the beginning of January, usually.
Okay.
And I talked about Tourette Syndrome and the myth of Tourette Syndrome and so on and so forth. And Richard saw it, and he said, hey, can I interview you for the show?
Awesome.
So then I got interviewed for the show. And then he says a little while later, hey, do you want to do this ad for me? Okay. And at that time, I was using my iPhone, and following his instructions. And he would say, get a blanket, and blankets everywhere, and pillows, make sure things are soft. So he's really picky about the sound.
Yeah.
And then he said, hey, do you want to do something about, I can't remember. I think it was about a number. He wanted me to read it, and he'd written it. And so it was about, I think, the number 3 things, good things happen in threes. So I did that. And then I said, hey, why don't I do bad things happen in threes? Because when I was doing my research for, when I was reading that, I looked it up, and there's lots of, good and bad things. So I did another section, and he said, hey, do you want to become a regular reporter? And I also, kind of got a little crazy with the equipment at that point.
We all get that way. Seriously, we all get that. I mean, now, like, I got the same thing. I got the boom mic with the shock mount. I got lights all over. I have the sound panels behind my desk,
right?
Which tries to. It's more to keep the sound away from everyone else, because I mean, this is my second bedroom up here, and my bedroom is next door. So when Donna goes to sleep and I'm still doing podcasts, I don't want her to hear everything.
Right. Yeah.
But can you hear my dogs?
I can hear barely.
Okay. You're going
very
nuts. You're going nuts. I need to put some of these panels around the dogs. But yeah, okay.
So that's how that happened. It kind of gradually happened. And I think because I took an interest and it was fun, and it got a little crazy. And I think Richard likes his, like his microphones and things.
Right.
And I just, my most recent thing is the Rodecaster Pro. I just bought.
Okay.
So here, I'll give you a little.
This is what Richard likes a lot.
That's I mean, I have a Zoom PodTrack P4,
right,
which I actually got because Tim in the background recommended it. He got one and liked it, so I got it, and I have some sound effects, and I don't know if they work, but I have that one. I can't hear them because I don't have headphones on, so I can't hear them.
I heard the drum.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I love it. I haven't taken it on the road yet. I'm actually taking it on the road next week. Next weekend I'll be in Gettysburg. And we're doing our 100th show of 3 Tortured Souls. So we're going to be recording and doing live shows from there. So
congratulations. That's pretty awesome.
So how did you get involved with Tourette's? And where'd that come from?
Well, when my oldest son was 11, he was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. And if you notice in my bio, I said Tourette syndrome plus.
Okay.
And what that usually refers to, it's not just tics, it's a lot of other things. So there's obsessive compulsive tendencies, there's rage, there's sleep problems, there's anxiety, there's sleep issues. So there's a whole lot of things that usually comes along with Tourette syndrome. And that's where the plus comes in. So he was diagnosed when he was 11. And my youngest son was diagnosed much earlier just because we knew what it was.
Okay.
My kids both started developing tics quite early on, which is actually quite unusual. Most kids develop tics sort of in that 6 to 9 age group. That is when the tics start showing up. Things like ADHD usually comes earlier, and obsessive compulsive disorder sort of comes whenever, usually later. But it really depends with my kids. The obsessive compulsiveness was evident fairly early when they were quite young. So, but which is, from my understanding, quite atypical. So that's where my background comes from. I'm also a teacher. I'm a high school math teacher. I guess retired now. I still think of myself as a high school math teacher, but I'm getting old. And so I thought it was a natural fit for me to help educate other teachers about Tourette syndrome. And Tourette Canada, many, many years ago, had a program where they would train you to become in-service providers to schools to help with strategies when kids had Tourette syndrome, ADHD, and OCD. They sort of concentrated on those three because those are the most commonly, the most common things that go together. Those they call them the big three. And there's lots that goes on with it, but those are the main ones, particularly ADHD. So that's how I got into it. And I have been doing that since 2005. And in 2018, I resigned from Tourette Canada. I actually became an in-service trainer. So I was training other teachers across Canada to do that. And I resigned mostly because of health issues. I have migraine headaches that were getting terrible. And around that time, Tamara Pringsheim, Dr. Tamara Pringsheim, who is a neurologist here for the Movement Disorder Clinic, and she looks at students or kids that come in with tics and tic-like behaviors, and is very familiar with Tourette syndrome. It's really her specialty. And she started the Tourette OCD. The Tourette. See, told you I was going to mix it up. The Tourette OCD Alberta Network, which was the main sort of reason for it happening was there was a big clinic up in Edmonton, which is about 3.5 hours north of Calgary. And that's where my kids were diagnosed. The psychiatrist retired and the whole clinic fell apart. They tried to keep it running, but it just couldn't run.
Okay.
For whatever reasons. I don't really know the reasons. I'm not involved. I was not involved in that. And Tamara, she recognized there was all of a sudden this big void that happened. So she wanted to fill that void. She was able to get funding to do that. And so they have several neurologists who are at the clinic, and there's psychologists, there's psychiatrists. It's like it's a full team, as well as the education component. So Julian Fletcher is the person, sort of the front person, who is also a teacher. And he and I have worked together quite a lot since 2020, I believe he was hired. And going into classrooms and educating teachers and helping students, helping teachers, that's sort of what we do. That's our part of it. But it really is like a whole, it's, you talk about holistic, which is used, sort of abused a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But really it is, because we've got everything involved. We've got the neurologists, the psychiatrists, the psychologists, the educators, sort of that whole thing. And what we try to do for people all over Alberta, our province, and even beyond if necessary, we try to connect them with people who have the specialties that are required or needed, the psychologists that have exposure and response therapy training, that have behavior, the correct training needed to help them with their obsessive compulsiveness, with their tics that are dangerous, etc. So they try to connect people with around the province with the correct care.
So can you describe, like, I mean, you mentioned a few things. You said tics and then ADHD and then OCD, which when I started, I just did a really brief cursory look into like some of the myths and
Yeah.
what it is. And I was surprised. Like and I want to get into this, but I have the movie/TV version definition of Tourette's.
Yes.
I see. So and this came up in conversation at work today because when I some of the guys asked me like what the show was about tonight, and I told them, and we were discussing it, and I said my biggest influence of what Tourette's is from the Boondock Saints.
Oh,
so the bar. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't.
Oh my
goodness! Fill me in.
So the bartender and Boondock Saints fans, let me know. But the bartender, older guy, and he has what would be the I guess the classic
stereotypical.
Yeah, thank you. Version of Tourette's, where he blurts out obscenities, and it's it's done for comic relief, and it's definitely funny, and we love the guy. He's a lovable character, but that's my idea of what Tourette's is.
Yeah, and that's most people's idea, and that has been perpetuated by things like what you're talking about. Oprah Winfrey had people on with Tourette syndrome. I think Dr. Phil had people on with Tourette syndrome, and of course, they always had swearing tics. They didn't have other people with other tics. And one of the things that's very interesting, I think, about Tourette syndrome is that everybody has different tics. About 7 to 10% of people who are diagnosed with Tourette syndrome have the swearing tic. And the other thing that's interesting about Tourette syndrome, and this is another myth, is that the symptoms will always stay the same, but they don't. So it can't be Tourette syndrome if the symptoms stay the same for many years. They can stay the same for a couple years, but usually they'll have other symptoms that will come and go. They never stay the same. And unfortunately, it's these swearing tics that are socially unacceptable, and other things like, the gestures, obscene gestures are also part of it. And that's also rare, thank goodness. But they will go away, but they usually are replaced with something else. Okay. So it's just a rotating cycle of new tics that keep happening over time.
So how, I guess, there's so many questions going through my head. And I don't want to come off topic, but go along with this. How many kinds of tics are there? And when you say tics, what does that mean?
I was just going to get into that if you didn't. Good. So that's a good question to go into. Essentially, there's two kinds of tics you have to be diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. The first is a motor tic, which is just like, it could be eye blinking, could be nose scrunching, could be neck ticking, could be arm flinging. It could be any motor tic. There's kids that I know that a movement. It has to be a movement. So squatting, jumping, twirling, any movement that our bodies are capable of having can become a tic. Okay. Vocal tics, the other component you have to have, are noises. It doesn't have to be words. It could be just clearing the throat. Can be a tic. Often tics are brought on by events, and not always. Like sometimes you can't figure out where this tic comes from. But for example, I just had COVID and I had a very phlegmy throat and I was clearing my throat a lot. So the phlegm goes away. Someone with Tourette syndrome will keep clearing their throat for months, maybe even years, but most likely months. To give you an example, my oldest son, his worst tic that he ever had, and it took us months to figure out because you want to eliminate all other possible health issues, was a vomiting tic. He got some kind of a bug and he was coughing so violently, had so much phlegm in his throat, he vomited. So that became his tic. When he got better, he would cough, then vomit. And you can imagine this is not something that you want happening because it can tear apart your esophagus, right? Yeah. This is not healthy. And those are the types of tics that we will do an intervention with. And the two types of interventions that we would do. One is called Cognitive Behavioral Intervention for Tics, or CBET, which I just saw a study recently saying that it's moderately effective, or exposure and response therapy, which is also part of an obsessive compulsive disorder therapy that my kids were actively involved in. And that one apparently is much more successful. And that's what our psychologist that we had with Graham used and very successfully stopped that tic. And what that involves is he had to imagine how awful he's going to feel if he doesn't throw up. Sounds kind of counterintuitive.
Okay.
He has to imagine himself vomiting over and over and over again. So it's that exposure. It's kind of like, what do you do if you are afraid of high places? You go to high places and you think about dying, right? That's how you overcome it, is by doing it. Okay. You overcome your fear by facing it. We've all heard that. So it's a very similar idea. And so what he did as well, the psychologist said, I want you to imagine how awful this is going to be. And I want you to, every time you feel like you're going to cough, because coughing was also part of the tic, and that it was cough vomit, right? There's two components. We call that a complex tic.
Was that like a trigger?
No, it wasn't. It was, I think they're just a combination. That's what his body liked to do. So quite often, as you get more and more complex tics, you might get like blink, 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 roll your eye, open your mouth, do your neck, and it's always in the same order.
Okay, it grows like a pattern or a routine.
Yeah. Okay. And
this is. I mean, I don't mean. I'm not trying to cut you off, and I'm not trying. I'm trying to be so. I don't know how to say things sometimes. I'm not
going to take offense, Kenny. Just say it.
I'm fascinated. I'm really fascinated because I'm learning so much, and my mind is going so crazy. Like, this is like the tics. I don't know how to say it. So are these? Could these be learned behaviors? Because you said like your son started coughing and then he vomited due to the coughing, and that became his tic.
Yeah.
So that was something that he learned.
I think it's more like it happened and his body decided to keep doing it.
Okay. All right.
And so I have an example. There's this fellow named Duncan McKinley. He's a fellow, he's a PhD psychologist, has something called the Brain Clinic in Ontario. He was one of the first speakers I saw with Tourette syndrome, and it was probably one of the most inspirational talks I'd ever gone to. Amazing man. And he gives a story about how he started to gain weight in university. And so his underwear got tight. And as a result of that, he developed a bum tic. So,
you got to tell me about that. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, he kept clenching his bottom, right, over and over and over again as he was walking all day long. And you can imagine how exhausting that could get.
Yeah, but he must have like
really,
hard glutes.
You bet. That's the plus side, right?
That's the plus side. Always look at the positive.
Yeah, yes. Exactly. And that's part of the thing, we're laughing at this and really it's not funny, but yes, it is funny. Right. And humor was actually a huge part with our family because sometimes the tics were really funny, and a good way to cope sometimes is just to laugh. One of my favorites is my youngest when he was in about grade 2, 3, 4. I think he had this particular tic. It lasted about 1.5 to 2 years. And he would run up to his friends and he would go, I love chocolate milk. And then say, hey guys, let's go do whatever. So he would always do that. And it was really funny because there was another young man who was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, and he was not in Troy's class, but he was in another class. And his tics at that time, because he also had severe ADHD, and so between the outbursts and the tics, it was pretty crazy. And so they asked me to come in and talk to his class and asked if Troy was willing to he'd never told anybody about his Tourette syndrome, if he would be willing to actually say he had it, so that the class, because this other kid, it was a new diagnosis, he didn't want anyone to know, but kids are smart, right? So if you talk about it and tell them what it looks like, they can put 2 and 2 together. And so maybe if Troy came out saying he had it, it would be better. So I talked with Troy, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I can do that." It was
Cool.
good for him, because I would.
Yeah.
There's no way I was going to push him to do it.
Right.
But if he wants to, that's great. So he came out to the classroom having Tourette syndrome, and one of the first thing the kid said is that why you always run up to us and say I love chocolate milk? Yep.
Oh, wow.
And I do an empathy exercise. I do this with adults. I do it with the kids, where I give them what it feels like. I give them a tick and a writing exercise, or if they're really young, a coloring exercise. And it's amazing to see the understanding that happens when you do this exercise. And after I did this, the school got back to me and the mother got back to me. All the bullying stopped, except on the playground with kids who didn't have the in-service that we provided.
Okay.
So they actually had me in, and I talked to almost all the classes in the school. I didn't talk to the kindergarten or grade 1. There's no need, but the older kids we did talk to. And the parents thanked me, because it just changed for this kid.
Wow.
And I'm not going to say it stopped 100%, because of course then there's junior high, and
Right.
but life did get better for him for at least a couple years. So
Wow.
yeah, so it can be pretty impactful.
Mm-hmm.
It can be painful, as I've talked about. Yeah, I have a friend, Steve Call, who would do the in-services with me, and he was an amazing speaker, and still is, except for his tics are so bad right now. And his tics are so painful that his neck hurts. He has very violent neck and head tics. And he also has a tic, or I don't know if he still does, but where he would take an object and hit his own head over and over and over again.
So
that's
would he actually pick up an object, or if he already had something in his hand? And
yeah, usually it would be that it can be induced by he sees an object, pick it up, hit. It could be that, but in his case, he had his tendency to have this tic where he's hitting his head. So if he happened to be eating with a fork in his hand, he would start hitting his So it could be dangerous. And there's not a lot of control, and he has probably one of the most serious cases I've ever seen.
Okay.
So that's something very important to understand, is this is a spectrum disorder, like autism, right? There's a big spectrum. So my kids, I would say my oldest had fairly serious Tourette syndrome. My youngest was sort of in the middle of the road, but both of them are pretty good right now. And that's something that can happen. There's sort of 3 paths that the development of Tourette syndrome can take. After puberty, it always gets worse at puberty. Yeah, crazy. Like, things are already bad, right?
Yeah, yes.
So
the world is already spinning out of control. Exactly. So yes.
So we add in the mix of Tourette syndrome and OCD and ADHD and sleep disorder and rage disorder, or whatever, all these other things.
Let me ask you real quick. Is that this might sound bad, is that a package deal? Is that you get all of that? That's all? I
think, and this is just off the top of my head, and I just want to make this clear too, that I am not a doctor, right? So,
right.
But I do have, I got my signed book. This is my what I call my Tourette Bible. I don't know how you can see. There we go. Tourette syndrome. Yeah. I have at my fingertips some of the best people in the world, specialists for Tourette syndrome, and they're wonderful. They look over all my slides. They make sure that I'm giving accurate information.
That's good.
And I've always done that, even when I worked with Tourette Canada, and Dr. Tamara Pringsheim used to be somebody who would help out Tourette Canada. So she's been involved all along. And so I've known her for a very long time. And Davida Martino is the author of the book, one of the authors, along with James Leckman from New York. So I have these people at my fingertips. So will I get it wrong? Probably. But I really do my best to have the most current information available.
Okay.
But we kind of got distracted there. Where were we?
I'm sorry. I had I distracted you. I'm sorry.
I know what I wanted to say. Just that after puberty, when the symptoms tend to peak. After that, there's 3 patterns that tend to happen. It goes back to where it was before and stays that way for the rest of their lives. Or it gets better to the point of almost disappearing, or it gets worse. So it's like 30%, 33%, 33%, 33%, essentially. Okay. It's like a fairly even split. And my friend Steve is the unfortunate one who, as he's gotten older, it's gotten worse. Okay. So it's really, really sad. But my two boys, luckily, seem to be much better. So better than what it was before puberty, but it has not disappeared.
Okay.
It's still there. And I think this is one of the myths as well, that they always tick. That is usually depicted within the movies where they're ticking, 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 constantly, not a break. And can that happen? Yes. Does it happen every day? No. Even my friend Steve, who can have tic attacks for 3, 4, 5 days, will go for long periods of time with pretty minor tics. They never go away, but pretty minor. And if you met him, you wouldn't even know he had it.
Okay.
So you may have met people with Tourette syndrome and you don't know it. If you met my kids, you probably wouldn't know it unless you looked for it. Little things like my son does a thing like that, my oldest son, and my youngest son still does an eye roll thing.
Okay.
And those are the obvious.
I bet I would pick like little things like that. I do a lot of tedious work. I love doing things that are just very tedious for hours. And
looking at photos of ghosts.
Yes. And I'll pick up something and I'll lean over to my wife going, "Did you notice this? Did you notice this about that person? I wonder something's off."
Yeah, and most people wouldn't notice though, but you might, absolutely. And I'll tell you, my husband and I will notice too. He'll nudge me, "Hey, look, that person."
What's going on there?
Right, we live with it, and so we're familiar with it, and and also like I have a fun example. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, and this is what I used to teach, and still do, though COVID prevented it quite a bit. When I go into the classroom, teaching understanding and compassion. So if you see somebody doing something weird on the street that you can't explain, don't automatically yell or shout or make fun of them or think in your head, "Oh, that person's weird." Think, "Gee, I wonder if they have Tourette syndrome." You shouldn't diagnose, but you can think in your head, "I wonder if they have something neurological that makes it hard for them to stop that." Could be something else. There's lots of different tic disorders besides Tourette syndrome. It could be, something like Huntington's disease or Parkinson's also has, very strange movements. So that's what I try to teach the kids. And we were at the ballet one year, and there was a guy sitting beside me, and he kept hitting me with his elbow. And then he all of a sudden shouted out, "Asperger's!" So my thought was not, "Oh my God, this guy's elbowing me, I'm going to hit him." That wasn't my thought. Right. My thought was, "I wonder if he has Tourette syndrome."
Right.
So in the intermission, I actually turned to him and I said, "Excuse me, I hope you don't mind me asking, but do you have Tourette syndrome?" And he went, "Yes." And I said, "Oh, I have 2 sons with Tourette syndrome," and we started talking.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So it was really, really cool, right? And then, sure enough, the lights go down. He went, "Asperger's."
That's awesome.
And so one of the things that can happen, and this is also leading into another myth about, a myth about Tourette syndrome, is that they can control it to some degree. But it takes an intense amount of concentration, and it's very difficult. And think of it as being like blinking, right? Blinking we do without thinking about it.
Right.
A lot of tics are done and they don't really even realize it's happening. Sometimes there's a premonitory urge, so they know it's coming, like a sneeze. You know how that, especially the big tics. The big tics are they're going to know they're coming. But some of the littler tics, they don't even know they're happening. So if I say to you, "Stop blinking," you can do it. So if you say to somebody with Tourette syndrome, "Stop ticking," they can do it to the same extent you can stop blinking, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
It's going to take a lot of concentration. So if you say to a student, "Stop doing your tic during this exam," especially if they have a vocal tic, they can stop it, probably for the duration of the exam, but at a tremendous cost. They won't be able to concentrate.
Okay.
Because that's all they can think about. So
I'd like to get into
Yep.
more the bullying
Ooh,
part of
yeah.
it. And you know, kind of because it's probably going to be a little sadder or harder topic, but then maybe we'll swing it back up at the end before we go to break.
Yeah.
So you did mention that, and you brought it up during your talk here. What's that like? How bad can it be? How I guess, yeah, how bad can it be?
Of course, it just like any bullying, it can be mild to nasty. And my kids were very, very fortunate that they never had any bullying that they were aware of. I think sometimes because there's so much going on with their tics and their obsessions and their lack of being able to focus, that they may not even be aware that it's happening. And I think that might have been true mostly for my oldest son. But at the same time, there's a lot of anti-bullying that happens, teaching that happens in the classroom anyway.
Okay.
And so I'd like to think it's getting better. I don't have any stats for that, so I don't know if it is. But I certainly have seen the results of doing that type of in-service for many, many years, that it's worked really, really well. I think some of the most difficult ones are when it is the swearing tic, because that's against school rules. So why does Sally get to swear, but I don't get to? And so there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of angst around that whole thing. Right. So I have seen some pretty horrific situations where the kids don't want to go to school. They're crying because of the harassment. And there's 2 kids that I can think of off the top of my head who did have the swearing tic. So that's usually when I got called in. If it's just a, or a neck tic or an eye rolling, it's not. It's even the I love chocolate milk.
That's awesome. We would be such good buddies, because we're like, I do too. Let's go.
He still loves chocolate milk.
That's awesome.
So you know what I'm saying? Like I think the bullying can increase with the degree of the vocal tic.
Right.
Now, also, there's some motor tics and some compulsions, and how do you tease it apart? It's very difficult, where they touch people, say on the shoulder,
okay,
right, or on the head or leg, or even genitals, right? So that can be a problem. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that at all. Okay.
Yeah. I could give you some stories on that if you want to, but before we do that,
we'll do that after the show. Yeah. I don't know if Facebook would allow that, but
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they can become very severe, and I think that's maybe when the bullying does get worse. And
right.
If I think back, and this is just totally anecdotal, if I think back to the schools that I've gone into, virtually and in person, the worst bullying has been in those situations, especially around swearing. And after I go in and talk to the kids, I usually almost always got a letter back from the parents saying, my kid's happy to go back to school. The kids came up and said, now I understand why we can't swear and you can. It's education, right? It's that building understanding and knowledge.
Yeah, that's it.
Right? So that's why we don't hide it. And that's probably another myth that I've had to convince parents, and sometimes I don't win. Don't be afraid of the label, because the label, if you get a kid who has ADHD, Tourette Syndrome, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or anything else, like generalized anxiety, it gives a means of communication, and it gives a reason and strategies along with all that. If you do get the help, like I was very fortunate, I had a psychologist who would go into the classroom, give the teachers strategies, would write things out, try this, try that. It was amazing. And the teachers listened, because the teachers want to help students. And we just aren't given, like, I didn't go through school and get strategies for dealing with this.
Right.
So, and they are to a maybe better degree now, especially for ADHD, but definitely not for Tourette syndrome or obsessive compulsive disorder. So, I have connections at the University of Calgary, and it's still lacking.
I totally agree. I think it's education. It's that understanding.
Yeah.
When you don't understand something and it's different, it's foreign to you, humans just suck. I mean, just to be blunt, humans suck. We have a tendency to either try to destroy things we don't understand, or we severely make fun of it or abuse it.
Yep.
And when you don't have that understanding, then that's what happens. But when you have someone come into the classroom, especially when you're dealing with a younger crowd, younger age, come into the classroom, explain it to us.
Yes.
And I didn't have that growing up either. I mean, we didn't have teachers that explained things to us. It was by the book. This is what you're supposed to learn. That's it. Anything that deviates from the course plan was go to the principal's office. And I have a lot of experience with that. The dean's office. I have a lot of experience with that. But,
why am I not surprised, Kenny?
Well, skepticism wasn't good in high school. It was like, but I have a question. And I went to Catholic school, which was even worse.
Oh, I've got a couple of Catholic stories.
Oh, my goodness. But
to be honest, the Catholic schools here in Calgary, we have two systems here. There's what they call the public and the separate. And the separate is Catholic, and it is funded by the government. And I have to say, they were amazing once they got me in. Because they're teachers, they're people, right?
Right.
But I do remember one principal bringing me in because the staff was just ready to, hurt the kid because they were, it was again, swearing. And of course, it's against school policy. And I know the teachers' aides and some teachers were saying, hey, they can't help it. They have Tourette syndrome. So we shouldn't be punishing this kid. Other teachers were, no, they just have to listen. They have to stop it. And then they brought me in and we did the empathy exercise. And the student's teacher was crying at the end of it. And the principal turned to me and said, so what you're saying to me is we can't punish this kid for swearing. And I said, that's correct. Yeah. And he was all over it. But he had to have his mind changed, right?
Right.
But he listened. As I say, I think most people, once they get the information, they're great. It's just they need the information.
Yeah. It's breaking through that wall, just getting them to listen. I mean, sometimes that's the hardest part, to get them to shut up, listen, let's listen to some good information, and then we can talk about more.
And I remember the parent being so frustrated, and I said, hey, look, I get your frustration, but don't forget they're letting me go in because she wanted me in. She was the one that fought to bring me in. I said that this is a great first step. So let's see where it goes from here.
Right.
And
so I gotta ask. Yeah. Like doing what I do, and you saying going into a Catholic school with a kid that has Tourette's and swearing tics and stuff, has demonic possession ever come up?
No, it has not.
Wow.
Now they haven't. Surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if it has come up in their circle, but to me, they have never brought it up.
Okay.
So I wouldn't be surprised because there are incidences, in history where, yes, that's what has happened. They've done exorcisms with these kids.
Yeah, I could totally see that happening, and it's scary. It's scary to me. I mean, I've seen, and Tim in the background, I'm sure he'll nod his head when he hears it, but we've seen some home exorcisms, and I see him nodding in the background. Horrible to view, and I can't imagine having a child go through that because they're suffering from these tics. So.
And I can understand from their perspective why they think a demon has possessed them, because it does look surreal. I mean, my son had he used to call his shiver tic, and his whole, when you shiver, you just, your whole body kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. So his whole body would start like that. And it usually was triggered by him being cold. But then it would just get out of control where he's really shaking. And then I don't remember if it was right or left, one of his arms would fly out. And if you happen to be in the way, you'd get hit. So it does look like he is possessed by something, right? Like something is taking control of his body and making him hit you. But no, that's not what's happening. You just happen to be in the wrong place.
I get that shiver when I hear my wife says, no, we're out of rum. And I'm like, no, go to the store. We got to go to the store now. Now. Oh, my goodness. All right. So we got about 10 minutes before we go to break.
Okay.
Our official pee break for everyone. So I want to... how about treatments? Are there any treatments besides what you've already described? Are there other treatments out there that can help?
Yeah, there's pharmacological treatments, of course. There are 3 drugs, and don't ask me to say them right now because they've got long names.
Trouble with that. I had to take a recording of Nick Little, our legal counsel at CFI, and use his audio recording in one of my videos because I could not say the drug's name.
Yes.
So he stars in my video like 20 times because I could not say the name of the drug.
That's funny. So you're sympathetic with my dilemma here.
I'm right there with you.
I can see them in my head. I just don't want to say them. So there's 3 known drugs that are specific to helping tics. Unfortunately, the side effects are quite severe.
Oh.
So they really try not to use them if they can help it. Okay. Because, and one of the big ones is weight gain, and sleepiness. Those are the 2 big ones. So they think, all the time. Yeah. So this is a problem. And so there are other drugs that are often used for the ADHD and the obsessive compulsive or anxiety. My kids were never on tic drugs because we never really thought the tics were the huge issue, except for that one that I was talking about with the vomiting. Okay. But then we used the exposure and response therapy quite successfully for that. Oh, and just and one of the reasons you can't just use that to get rid of all the tics, because that tic was replaced by a new one. So that's the problem, right? It'd be a never ending.
Wow. Yeah.
But maybe it can lower the incidence, or they're still researching that. That's really new, so it's not something that's been around a long time. So there are drugs that are quite successful at treating ADHD, as we know, and stimulants, and there are drugs that are very successful at treating anxiety disorders such as obsessive compulsive disorder. And my kids were on the anxiety medications when they were going through puberty, and it got them through it. It allowed them to actually get through and function. And that's our key, right? Is for them to function. And I have to say, all 3 of my boys are grown up now, and they're all doing really well. My oldest has a master's in civil engineering. Oh my goodness. My brain's going. Civil engineering. And he just changed jobs and is now a data scientist and is working full time. Got married this year, has a house. Awesome. So I think that's pretty successful.
Yeah, that's good. That's showing that yes, you can have this syndrome, but you can still function and have a normal life.
And that's another myth, that you can't have a successful life. And I think with treatment and help, even some severe cases can do quite well. Are there cases that you can't work other than at home? Say, yes, Steve Call is an example, my friend. Right. He's on disability, and because how he just can't work when you're ticking that severely for 5 days in a row or 3 days in a row. It's just so difficult. So yes, there are those cases, but it is more rare. Thank goodness. Unfortunate for Steve, right? But it is not as common as people think. My middle boy, who also could qualify for the definition of Tourette syndrome, because essentially Tourette syndrome is the 2 kinds of tics I said, motor and vocal, onset before age 18, and you have to have them for more than a year, and they have to wax and wane, come and go in how severe they are, how frequent they are, etc. So those are the criteria basically from the DSM-5, and I'm really shortening that. But so he could qualify, and actually did have a doctor say, hey, do you realize? And I said, yes, but he's never needed interventions there. Because remember that spectrum I was talking about?
Yeah.
He's way down here.
Okay.
He has some mild tics, and his biggest thing is anxiety. He has a PhD in electrical engineering. So I think that's pretty awesome.
That's awesome.
He's in Boston right now trying to set up his own company and married. So he's done well.
Awesome.
And my youngest son, he graduated from SAIT, which is one of our technical schools here. And he's a computer IT tech and has a full-time job and is amazing because he graduated during COVID.
Nice.
So he's
Very
done,
nice.
he's still living at home, which he's talking about now that he's been working for a year, that maybe one day he'll move out. He's talking about it. So I think my kids, I'm really proud of my kids. They've done amazing, and they had to fight. It was a hard fight.
Yeah.
And they did awesome.
I'm
But
proud. Yeah.
But they embraced the help. We had psychiatrists, psychologists, neurologists, occupational therapists, dietitians. All of them were involved in their care to try and get them through to adulthood.
I like how you say that they embraced the help, and I think that's a lesson that we all need to learn. My generation, or at least from my perspective, growing up, it was always do it yourself.
Yes.
And I still, unfortunately, I still have that mentality a lot, and it does hurt. It does hurt my progress, of whatever I'm doing, because I'm trying to do everything myself. I'm not trying to bother other people or get help. We don't ask for help. That's what I grew up with. And it's very hard to give that up, and to hear that they embrace the help. That's great. That's great to hear.
And I feel pretty lucky because I know parents who try to get the help in the kids, especially because they're hitting that teenage year.
Yeah.
that are struggling. They want to get their kids the help, but the kids just won't have anything to do with it. So I feel very lucky that my three were all over it. So it's good.
Rob Palmer's got a suggestion here. Homeopathic remedies have no side effects. So thanks, Rob.
Yes, Rob.
They have no benefits either.
That's right. And unfortunately, because you're dealing with desperate parents who have kids who are in need and are struggling and suffering terribly, it's not uncommon. In fact, the complementary and alternative medicine is extremely common and underreported. They feel, like in this book that I was reading, they feel it's underreported because I think the parents are afraid to tell the doctors that they're treating their kids with this other stuff because they're afraid of criticism. They're afraid that they're going to be put down or criticized somehow. But it's really, really important for them to tell them. Homeopathy doesn't matter. There's going to be no interaction, right?
Right.
But if you start going to a naturopath and they're talking about herbal medications, there can be drug interactions with herbs that can be quite serious. So that is of concern. So one of the things that they talk about, because it's so prevalent in the population in general, and probably more so when you're dealing with issues like this. In fact, one of the things we had to battle when we had our chapter, Tourette Canada chapter here in Calgary, our Facebook page, somebody wanted us to post a request for names of naturopaths to be used. And Steve and I, because we were running it at the time, Steve and I were like, okay, what do we do with this? And we decided just to say, I'm sorry, we can't recommend any medical advice on this. So that's how we avoided it. But there's just no way that we were going to start that because it costs a lot of money and it's not effective. There's no evidence that any of this stuff is effective. And it's interesting too, because a few years ago, when I looked into some of the alternative things on the internet that were available for Tourette syndrome, there was something called the silencer, spelled SYLENCER instead of the regular silencer. And it was literally something you put on the kid's face with a strap. so that, and it was like with the sound dampening material, so that if you screamed or had a vocal tick, it wouldn't be so loud. Essentially a muzzle.
Holy shit.
I am happy to report that Amazon.com no longer sells it.
Good. Wow. I was just like, I was thinking like, you mean a muzzle? Like they actually muzzled somebody?
And the irony of that is that if you put something on a kid's face with Tourette syndrome, they have lots of sensitivities that go along with it usually. It could probably make his tics worse, like his motor tics.
Okay.
Like he could develop a neck tick. He could develop so many other things because this thing's bugging him.
Wow.
So I think it would be very counterproductive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. We have reached our break time. It is the pee break time because everyone that has been indulging in adult beverages, everybody needs to pee. So we have an official pee break. It's about 3 minutes long. And then when we come back, we will take viewer questions. So this is your time to shine, people. If you have questions, we have a bunch in the queue. Tim has been doing an amazing job in the background, saving the questions. So if you have a question, please put a Q in front of it. That way Tim can see it and put it in the queue for us. But we have a bunch set up already. So without further ado, I'm going to go to our break. Again, it's 3 minutes, about 3 minutes long. So we have time to do what we need to do. All right. So here we go in 3, 2, 1.
Do satanic cults lurk in the shadows? Can memories of satanic ritual abuse be repressed? Do exorcisms really drive out demons? And are those demons always possessing Zach Baggins? I'm JD Sword, the Satanic Skeptic. Join me on The Devil in the Details as I examine these questions and more, bringing a skeptical and satanic perspective to the paranormal. The Devil in the Details, available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, and more.
Jetham for us. Jetham for us. Hail Satan. Hail Satan.
Are you tortured by what you see and hear about the paranormal field? Join us as we critically examine and question paranormal claims, science, ghosts, demons, cryptids, UFOs, ghost hunting technology, and much more are all on the table for discussion. 3 Tortured Souls is a video podcast that streams live on Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 Pacific.
3 Tortured Souls.
All righty then. We are
You caught
back.
me.
I caught you. I saw it. I see everyone's thumbnail, and I'm like, oh, she's chewing on something. It's all good. This is a bar. We can do that.
Yeah.
I've eaten dinner right before we started. Like as the opening video goes, I'm like chowing it down. All right.
There's some good questions I was reading in the break.
I didn't even get a chance to. I was just loosening
Really
up.
good questions.
All right,
Can't
so
wait.
Let's get into it. The first one I'll put up here. Oh, I love it. Tim is on the ball. I love it. You're hired, Tim, full time. Melissa says, if you don't mind me asking, do your kids have verbal Tourette's or do they have muscular tics too?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And to have Tourette syndrome, they have to have both. And yes, they have both. And as I say, one of the motor tics that my son had was that shiver tic. My youngest son has like thumb tics that make his arm sore, and he has lots of eye tics. And yeah, so that's just a very brief description. It would take me all day to list all their tics.
Okay, cool. All right, moving on. Let's see. Do you think TikTok tics are real?
Ah.
Hey, Janice.
Hi, Janice. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
So the TikTok tics thing was really quite something that came about during the pandemic. And they started seeing people at the clinic here at the Tourette clinic that were atypical presentations of Tourette syndrome. As I said before, it usually happens early on, like between 6 and 9 is when the tics start. And it's usually, I think it's a 3-to-1 ratio for boys to girls. So it's more common in boys, and that might be wrong. It might be 4-to-1. I'd have to look at my slides. Usually I look really smart because I have slides in front of me. So now I'm relying on memory.
Everything's on the fly tonight.
It is on the fly, but it is significantly more boys than girls.
Okay.
And what they were seeing were, and it's gradual. So the tics usually start with an eye tic, something really innocuous, just really minor. And then they become more and more tics, and they get bigger and bigger. And as they get older, so it's slow. It doesn't happen in a week. It happens over years. And so all of a sudden they were seeing these girls that were 15, 16, 17 years of age, it's sort of in that range, teenage girls, who were coming in with extremely severe tics that started all of a sudden. And one of the commonalities that they found with these people, these young ladies who were coming to clinic, and was that around the world, so this is not just in Canada or the US, but around the world, they were all coming in saying the same words. One of the most common ones was bean. They had the same motor tics. I mean, there were variations on the theme for sure, but there was sort of this common core of tics that they were seeing across the board. And what they realized is that these girls had been watching TikTok videos of a woman from England who has Tourette syndrome. And one of her tics was shouting bean. So she'd be sitting here talking bean. Like that's what the kind of thing it would be, right? Like a tick. Bean. And it's just sort of random, doesn't make sense. And so they were thinking, well, this is really odd. So was the TikTok tics causing Tourette syndrome? That was the headlines, right? The headlines all over the place. TikTok is causing Tourette syndrome. Yeah, no. It's a little more complicated than that. What they've decided is it's not Tourette syndrome, but something called functional tic disorder. And this is something that is known, and they see, and there's a functional something, I can't remember the word. There's a functional disorder that happens where people will see something, and then their body, for whatever reason, imitates it. Nobody really knows why it happens, as far as I know. Somebody might, but not that I'm aware of. For example, somebody can watch somebody have a seizure on TV. Now, TV seizures apparently aren't really realistic. So they show up at the hospital in the middle of a seizure that looks identical to the ones that are on TV. They run all the tests. They have not had a seizure. But what they're experiencing is real. So that's what they feel is happening here with these tics.
Wow.
And because of the pandemic, kids are locked up. They're at home. They're
Right.
not going to school. They're
Right.
watching more social media. They found these Tourette tics. And I guess if their brain is ready for something like dysfunctional tic disorder, it can happen. And kind of think of it like, if somebody in a room yawns, like if I yawned right now, how many people in the
Don't
audience
do
would
it.
Yeah, I won't do it. Just saying it is enough, probably.
Right.
It's going to be.
I feel it now.
So they feel it's like an exaggeration of that. So it's a normal part of our brain, but for whatever reason, maybe because they're going through puberty, they really don't know. There's this exaggerated mimicking that's happening. We tend to mimic. We have that tendency already, and it's just gone crazy. So what they're telling these kids is just don't watch these videos, as well as they have to go through the same types of therapies as someone with Tourette syndrome, but they can't treat it like Tourette syndrome because it's not.
Okay.
So the diagnosis is really, really important here.
That's interesting.
So yeah, that's been a pretty big thing in the media. And so no, TikToks do not cause Tourette syndrome. So TikTok tics, did they have an influence on these people's tics? Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's the case. Just like that person who watched a seizure on TV, they were influenced, their brain, for whatever reason, was influenced by what they were watching on TV.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers it.
Sounds
Great question.
cool. All right. Something to Sasquatch about. I love that name.
I love it too.
When Tourette's developed late in life, is the cause known? 2 questions I know.
No, good questions. And there's pretty short answers, so that's a good thing. So the definition of Tourette syndrome is it has to be developed before the age of 18. So I guess the answer to that would be no. Can you develop Tourette-like symptoms later in life due to things like a car accident, head injury? Yes, that can happen. But I'm not sure if the diagnosis would be Tourette syndrome or something else. Probably some kind of brain trauma is what my guess is. Drugs overdoses can also cause some of that to happen.
Okay.
So is the cause known? Sort of. How's that for an answer? Yes and no. So they believe it to be genetic. And if you look at my husband and I, if there's not the tics per se, but we have ADHD and OCD on each side of our family. And they believe that it's a dominant recessive gene. So it has to come from both sides of the family. Okay. And I remember Duncan McKinley, that guy I mentioned the very first talk that I went to, he actually said, stop blaming your spouse because you're both responsible. So I thought that was good advice.
Yeah.
So can it develop where there's no family history of any of those things? Yes, I have heard of that. So we don't really know. There have been some suggestions that maybe early in life, if you get strep, that it can cause it. But that has been difficult to pin down. So there's a group of people who are really advocating for treatment. It's called PANDAS, I think, that were really pushing for treatments for all kids, thinking that it was a strep infection and they just needed antibiotics and the Tourette syndrome would go away. But they haven't been able to definitively prove that. They haven't totally discarded it either, from my understanding. So there you go.
Okay.
Is that good?
Awesome. Good answer. Good answer. Thank you very much. All right. And let's see. Robert, question. Why is it that's with some Tourette that the outbursts are the most vile sexual or hateful language?
Yeah. I mean, we don't really know, but we have some ideas as to why that happens. As I said before, if something sort of happens where it's uncomfortable, etc., it seems to promote the development of a tic. So you're on the playground and you know you're not allowed to swear. You hear a kid swear and that becomes your tic. So again, it's that mimicking that's happening.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, that's what can happen. And I have known, there was a really great young man that I saw speaking at a Tourette conference. Yes, there are those things. And he did have all those vile, sexual, awful outbursts. I mean, they were definitely X-rated. And so he's sitting there talking like I am, very intelligent, very, very personable, awesome. But
Okay.
because I knew he had Tourette syndrome and he's flipping off and grabbing his genitals and saying awful things in the middle, like in the middle at the end, it was okay because we all knew what was happening. And also, this is something else that happens with Tourette syndrome is when you're nervous. So good stress, bad stress. So you're really excited. It's your birthday. You're going out with your friends, or you have a test tomorrow, or you're going to be in front of a bunch of people. You know, that kind of nervous thing. Your tics are going to get worse. End of story. That's what happens. We know that. It's well documented. So for this kid, he's in front of this whole room full of people talking. Is he like that all the time? Probably not. But during that talk,
Right.
absolutely. So some people, it's really, really hard. I helped a case where it was a group home, and this fellow was mentally handicapped, developmentally, and he was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. And his thing was he would say awful, awful things to any handicapped person. So they would go out on date.
Awful specific to the handicap.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
Terrible. So the group home got in touch with me and they're like, what can we do? And we worked on that one for several weeks before, because it's trial and error. How do you work around this?
Right.
Because this is not acceptable. So why does that happen? We don't know really. But for some people, it's a real struggle. And my kids, luckily to this day, it hasn't happened. Could it happen in the future? Yeah. So that's one of the things they know about, right? Is that could happen to them in the future.
Yeah. I mean, the more we talk about it, the more it's like, maybe these are things that just people think. I mean, because without trying to be mean, we all have these thoughts that pop in our head.
Yep.
And even though we know they're wrong and we should not be thinking them, they pop into our heads.
Yeah. And they just come out with Tourette syndrome.
They come, yeah.
There's no filter.
Yeah. Yeah. Normally we can filter it
Yeah.
and stop it and say, no, that's wrong. We don't say that. We move on.
And not only that, they get an urge. It's almost like obsessive compulsive disorder. Many of the tics have urges, and they actually feel relief after they say the tic. So there's actually a bit of a reward that happens because they feel better afterwards.
Payoff. Okay.
Yeah. Even though they feel terrible afterwards, right? Like there's that guilt, etc. They feel terrible.
Do you know of any like MRI exams where they show like lighting up pleasure zones?
Yeah.
Like,
it's definitely quite different.
Okay.
So that if you look at a brain imaging, yes, there are differences in the brain. Just like with ADHD, I actually used to show this to teachers to say that yes, ADHD is actually a physical thing. It's not made up by doctors or teachers or parents to try and handle their kids. You can see I think it's the prefrontal cortex. The development is way behind. And there's a slide where it shows a normal development and it developing, and then someone with ADHD, and it doesn't catch up until, I don't remember the age, but it's years. Wow. So it is actually neurological. This is not made up, right? They're not doing it on purpose for attention. There's another myth that I've heard from teachers. They're just doing it on purpose. They just want attention.
All right.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Do I have time for a little story?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there is a teacher, and he's a very well-meaning, awesome teacher. And he came to one of my in-services. It was at a professional development. And he had a student with Tourette syndrome. I think it was grade 6 or 7. And they were doing history. And they were talking about the War of 1812. And this kid would say, well, I was in the War of 1812. And then he would go on and say, and they were riding horses. Well, I was riding horses. And he knew he had Tourette syndrome, but he thought that he was being belligerent, that he was seeking attention. And I said, no, that's called echolalia.
Yes.
But what was confusing to him was that he would change the sentence to be I, right? Yeah. So I totally get that, because you think of echolalia as being you just repeat the sentence completely back. But no, it can be twisted. And so he went back and he went, well, now I know. Thank you. Right? I mean, so...
That's I gotta say, this is the second time in my life that echolalia has shown up on this show.
Really?
The first time was I investigated a fake psychic medium guy that with a demonic case. He was apparently dealing with a demon, and he brought up echolalia, but he had the completely wrong definition of it and didn't realize he was wrong. And I was talking
What did he think it was?
he described it in a completely different way. And it was a Catholic apologist that I was talking to
Right.
at the time. And he brought it up. He's like, this is the definition. Here's the link. You can look it up. But he has it completely wrong.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, I've never heard that term before. And I didn't know. Now I know what it means. And then when you brought it up, I'm like, oh, this is great. I know what that means.
Here's another one for you. Echopraxia.
What's that?
Copying others' movements. And that's part of Tourette syndrome as well. So you can see how that could get into people into trouble. It's mocking.
Right.
Stop mocking me.
Yeah. Wow.
But it's not. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, this show is so awesome. I'm learning so much tonight. All right. What do we got, Tim? Oh, awesome. Jade Kitten. The swearing tick you see most often in media are all I know of Tourette's. And I always wondered, why is it swear words as opposed to other words?
Great question.
I think you kind of touched on this.
I did. Yeah. And I think hopefully I answered that. And luckily, as I say, 7 to 10% of the people have swear words. So it's just, that's what you see on TV for whatever reason, because it's sensational, but it's not the reality of most people with Tourette syndrome. However, I don't want to put down the actual terribleness. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but of the people who actually have to put up with it, right? It would be awful to be that 7 to 10%. So
yeah. I mean, constantly. I honestly, I do it a lot anyway. Panic. People. I'm constantly saying jackass, and it's always because of somebody pisses me off. Yeah. And like I talk to them like, yeah, jackass. That's what it is.
So I had an aversion to swearing until I had kids with Tourette syndrome. So I hated being around people who swore. I couldn't handle it. I didn't like it. I felt uncomfortable. Then I went to my first Tourette conference, and in the middle of speakers thing, there's this F-bomb going off, this S word going off. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Nothing like exposure to help me with my issues.
That is exposure therapy in the extreme, I'm sure, because you got it all, like not only curse words, but sexual stuff and everything hitting you.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. Bob, in order to be diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, you mentioned that you have to have a physical tick and a verbal tick, but you have to have them concurrently.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, where you have them both at the same time. So you have to have, say, as well as an eye rolling tick that happens throughout the day. No, they can actually be just physical for a month and then just vocal for a month, or any mix of the above. So it's, as long as you have them both within a year, I believe it is, then it would be considered to be Tourette syndrome.
Cool.
Great question.
Right. That's probably the shortest answer we're going to get tonight. Awesome.
I like to talk.
Well, so do I. So this can go on for a 3-hour show. I'm good with that.
Yeah.
What do you do when your eyes twitching, blinking, eyebrow raising is your tick?
Yeah, and this is a really tough one, Melissa, because this is one that my son has or had, and he still has to some extent. And the problem with those, you think, oh, well, that's not going to be a problem. However, can you imagine blinking all the time, rolling your eyes while you're trying to read? It's going to be really, really hard. Right. And not only that, it's draining and it can give you headaches. So one of the side effects to having these particular tics is you can end up with a headache. And how to stop that? That's when I think I would send you to a therapist, like a psychologist who's science-based, who actually knows about cognitive behavioral intervention for tics, or maybe even better still, exposure and response therapy. So that's what I would say to try and stop it, because trying to stop it physically all the time is going to be really, really hard. And I would really recommend finding somebody to help you with that. To overcome it, because it's tricky. It's really hard.
Okay.
And my best advice, if you're not getting headaches, just let them happen. And if you don't worry about it, sometimes the anxiety of it goes down and then the tics go away on their own. So that can happen too. So that might be a bit of advice that might be worthwhile.
Cool. All right. Bob, have neurologists discovered what parts of the brain are affected by Tourette's?
Good question. As far as I know, I think they have a pretty good idea. I don't know if they're 100% sure. I do know they were doing a study here at the Children's Hospital with magnetic resonating, I can't remember the whole term, but basically putting big magnets on your head that were directed specifically into the part of the brain that they thought might be responsible for tics, and they were seeing how that was going to go. I haven't seen the results of that study yet, but I think they have an idea. I don't know if they actually know for sure.
Okay, fair enough. My doctor put me on, I'm not going to say it, and I don't care what anyone says in the chat room, I am not going to try to pronounce it, medicine. I saw a couple comments earlier. No. Commonly used for RLS to help with my motor tics. Do you know if that is something common?
So basically, I think that is, I'm not sure if that's like Risperdal or not. I don't think so. I do know that there's a lot of medications that are tried for tics that are not specifically meant for tics. It's like a lot of medications, they were meant for this, and now hey, look at it also does this. Right. So I'm not familiar with that particular one. So I can't really answer to it, and it is medical. So I don't know if it's common. It could be. And I do know that the medical profession really does try hard to find the right medication. I know with my oldest son, we found it right away, and we were lucky. Because usually it takes multiple different tries with multiple different medications with awful side effects. So it can be quite stressful. My youngest son was more like that. It was much more difficult. So I don't know if it's something that's common. That's a good question though. And I should probably ask my neurology team.
Okay. I'm going to try it because I'm getting a lot of complaints to try and say it. So roll. Ropenolol?
I think it's ropinirole.
Ropenolol. Oh, ropenolol.
That's a guess.
Ropenolol sounds better. That sounds more medicine-like.
It sounds like I know what I'm talking about.
I know.
I could look it up in my book.
I should have looked it up.
So, Melissa, if you want to stay at the end, I can look it up in my book and see if it's listed. But that's all I can do. I can't say much more than that.
See, usually stuff like this comes up on the Three Tortured Souls, and I have a chance to mute my mic and go over to the other screen, look it up, and have Google say it for me. I'm like, okay, I know I'm going to sound smart now.
That's what I have to do for the Skeptic Zone a lot.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I love Google.
Yes.
All right. What do we got, Tim? Melissa, given your experience personally and professionally, do you have any pointers for ways to alleviate the side effects of tics other than the normal stuff? Headaches, eye strain, etc.
Yeah, again, I think those are good. It's a good question. And yeah, work with your doctor, work with your psychologist. We worked with our psychologist a whole lot. I can certainly give you an example of one of the things that we did with Troy. But remember, that was with Troy with medical advice, working with a professional. So don't just sort of run with that and do your own thing, right? It's really important. So I was saying he had this tic that kind of went like this, and his whole arm got very, very sore. So that was a tic that he wanted to stop. So what the therapist did is he said to him, okay, I want you to think about not ticking and how awful it's going to feel. And he made me say those things. Well, he got to say, oh, you're doing a great job, Troy. Well done. So I had to be the awful person telling him how terrible he was going to feel. So that's the exposure part. And of course, you want to encourage them. And to imitate the tic not happening, he took tape, like packing tape, I think it was, or some kind of tape, wrapped up his hand so that he couldn't move it. And Troy did really well. He was like 7 years old at the time. And so then he said, Troy, do you think you can keep your hand taped until you get home, which was at that time about an hour drive? And Troy went, yep. So we never did anything that he didn't feel he could handle. Okay. So that was really, really important. Don't overdo it. He made it home. And believe it or not, it essentially got rid of the tick.
Wow.
He says it came back every once in a while. He would have it, and he still has it sometimes. It comes, they tend to come and go a little bit.
Right.
He says he gets it a little bit, but yeah, the pain was stopped. So that's an example of that kind of therapy. But again, that's a memory from a long time ago.
Right.
There's probably more to it that we did, then we just don't have time to go into it. So definitely getting somebody who can help you through that and has the background and the science behind it, I guess, the studies, right?
Yeah.
Because those are fairly new. The exposure and response ones, I just read one recently that came through the Tourette OCD Alberta Network that was very promising. But they're early days, so they may 5 years time say, "Hey, that was methodologically wrong," or etc. Right? So,
Right.
It's early days. It has to be replicated.
Definitely go with the science-based medicine. That's what we promote on this show all the time. So yes, absolutely. Good advice. All right. From Bob, you mentioned that Tourette's can be found in boys more so than in girls. Does it also affect one race over the others?
Great question. So early days when I was talking about Tourette syndrome, we would say that it will affect all populations equally except those of African background. And they're now saying that the reason that it's not showing up in African background is lack of doctor care, lack of health care. So it may actually be in those populations and we just don't know it.
It's not reported.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And partly because in a lot of countries, even in North America, doctors just aren't aware of what Tourette really looks like. When I actually, it was my mother-in-law who sent me an article saying, I think this is what Graham has. And we'd had him to specialists because he had all these crazy tics that were quite extreme like that, right? Like really extreme tics. So, and high-pitched squeaks and crazy. And so I went to my doctor and I said, I think my son has Tourette syndrome. And she says, oh, I don't think so. That's a very serious diagnosis. But to give her credit, she sent me to the Tourette clinic and listened to me and said, well, can't lose anything. Let's send him. And he came out with, Tourette syndrome and a whole bunch of other stuff. So,
okay.
So I think, and I hear those same stories today. So that was a long time ago,
right.
Over a long time ago. And I still hear those stories from parents today. I think it's getting better slowly.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
Good question.
Good. Are we seeing a rise in the number of people with Tourette's? What do you think that might be, if so?
Yeah, this is very similar to the autistic question. And I get this one a lot as well. Those of you familiar with Oliver Sacks, he's one of my favorite doctors. He's a neurologist and I love his reading. There's a movie that Robin Williams was in that, Awakenings, I think it's called. I may have the wrong name.
Let me see.
So if you look it up, Robin Williams, Oliver Sacks, it'll come up. Robin Williams played Oliver Sacks. So one of the things, he was one of the first modern people. I mean, it's been around a long time. The name Tourette syndrome, people have been aware of it since the 1800s, or it's been documented since the 1800s.
You're right. Awakenings.
Awakenings. Woo! Yeah. I'm usually bad with names. So I got one. So anyway, so Oliver Sacks in 1972, I believe, or in the 70s, he got his first Tourette patient in New York. He was in New York City. And he was like, wow, it says in my books that it's 1 in a million. And yet I walk out in the street and I saw 3 people ticking. So his question was, are we just not diagnosing it? So I think, and now they're saying it's 3 in 100 or 1 in 100, 1 in 100, somewhere in that range. So it's a lot less than 1 in a million, right? It's way more frequent.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it's 3 in 100, somewhere in that range. And so what it is we are diagnosing it more and we are recognizing it more. I don't think it's any more frequent. And that's what I have learned is that it's actually not more frequent. We're just finally diagnosing it.
Okay. Interesting. Cool. Have you heard of any ghosts?
I love that question.
Oh,
I love it.
Nice. Nice. Oh.
There's a really good question because if you haven't, I mean, it's as I say, quite a large percent of the population, you would expect that you would find a ghost with Tourette syndrome.
Well, to be fair, Some of the people that I interact with do claim to hear the F-bomb.
Well, there you go.
Over radios, broken radios. I mean, there's a lot more problems with that. There's so many problems with that. But
I've never come across it in all my research with hauntings and stuff. I have not come across it. So have you?
No, I have never come across a claim. How do I say this right? A claim that a ghost has Tourette's. That would be interesting. I'm going to bring that up from now on. Anytime that I accompany a group and they're going to be like, well, we hear the F word. And I'm going to be like, well, obviously they have Tourette's. I mean, that's their vocal tick.
Oh, you're going to start a really bad stereotypical rumor.
I think that's going to blow their mind. They're not going to know what to say. Like, what do you mean? Oh my goodness. And they're going to look for it. Yeah, you're right. They're going to look for it. I'm going to be like, no.
And if they see the ghost do something weird like this, they're going to go, oh, it's a tick.
See, that's when my and I hope this is not bad, but my skeptic tick will come out and be like, yo, jackass, just stop. Stop. That's my go-to word. Sometimes when it's just when the level of ignorance is just so high.
Yeah.
I just can't help it. It just comes out. I don't think about it. It just comes out.
There's that lack of filter again, right?
Yeah, the filter just completely goes away, and I've had enough. And it's no, we're done.
That was a fun question.
That was really good. That was good. Squatch Talk. What's up? How often are TS people interviewed about why they feel they do what they do?
Great question, and not enough in my opinion. There you go.
Okay.
Unless it's really sensational, it's hard to get people on, unfortunately. We've even had that issue trying to get into schools here in Alberta. And when I was in the school system, part of it was, I believe, and this is just a personal thing, so no data to back this up, that part of it was because they don't see their students having Tourette syndrome. What they don't recognize is often students will sit there all day, either hiding their tics or doing tics that they can do that are not seen, such as a stomach tick or foot tick or, clenching their arm tick or something that can't be visible to release that tension of the tick. Then they get home and they're exhausted and can't do any homework, can't do anything, have arguments with their parents because they're exhausted and they're supposed to be doing homework or going off to hockey or going wherever. So they often hide it because they're embarrassed. And if they don't have a diagnosis, for example. And so therefore, why do I need, and they have that same perception. Well, they're not swearing. They're not having outbursts of swearing. So it's not Tourette syndrome. So therefore, we don't need the education around it because we don't have that in our school. But when you've got 3 in 100 or 1 in 100, whatever it is, or between 1 and 3 in 100, that's a lot of students. Most schools are 500 students. You're going to have a few kids in there with Tourette syndrome, guaranteed.
Yeah. It's that stereotype.
Yep.
That prevents it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good question. Is cracking your knuckles, especially not knowing you're doing it? I do it in my sleep, apparently. Considered a physical tick.
Wow. That sounds like it would be, actually, because just cracking your cracking your knuckles occasionally, I wouldn't call a tick. Just like, when you move your leg when you're waiting in the doctor's office, you move your foot. That's just sort of like a thing we do. I wouldn't call it a tick unless you start doing it all the time, everywhere. Like you have to stop, sit down, and then move your foot. I would say then that's crossing over into a tick. Okay. And it's hard to define that, right? Sometimes it can be really a gradual thing. But to be cracking, it could be. That's all I can say. I can't say definitively, but it could be.
Yeah. I mean,
and it doesn't mean he has Tourette syndrome either. Right? You can have one tick all your life and it's got another name. So,
I have a habit now since I've grown this beard. I have a habit of my wife points it out. Like I'm
Yeah.
constantly doing this, like,
Yeah.
all the time, and it's not something I think about anymore. And I think
Yeah.
it's more because
It's
there's
there.
that slight itch. There's always that itch there. But
Yeah.
I always do this.
But that's
But
a
I
great
think-
illustration of how a tic develops, though, too.
Okay.
Right? For someone with Tourette syndrome, right? You grow a beard, you start doing this.
I do that all
So,
the time.
yeah.
Constantly.
And I'm not saying you have a tic, you know what I'm saying?
Right,
But I'm just,
right.
I'm using it as an analogy of how tics can develop with people with Tourette syndrome.
And I'm pretty sure, like, because I had the beard before, and then I shaved it off.
Yeah.
And once it was gone, the tick was gone. Now I'm calling it a tick, but
Yeah.
the routine, the habit was gone. I wasn't playing with my chin hair anymore because it
That's
wasn't
right.
there.
And if with someone with Tourette syndrome, you remove the stimuli, sometimes that does happen. The tick will go away. But quite often you remove the stimuli and you're still going to do this.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Good question.
All right.
Aw.
Jay, Ken, do you have Tourette's?
Melissa.
Do you feel obligated to answer?
I can't answer that one for sure.
Oh, that's for Melissa. Okay.
Yeah.
If you would, but please emphasize it's okay if she doesn't feel comfortable. I'm not sure what you're getting at there, but I mean, it looks like Melissa's talked about it a lot.
She
tonight,
has, yeah.
So I'm thinking she understood.
And if you do, Melissa, or if you don't, doesn't matter, but welcome. It sounds like you have lots of tics.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, she said she doesn't mind. Yeah.
Aw.
I don't mind.
Good for you.
Yeah. I mean, these were good questions. Do we have any more? Yeah, we do. Jay, what's up? Do you think that some witchcraft affliction cases during the witch hunts in Europe could be explained by Tourette syndrome?
Great question. I've never been asked that question before, but it's totally plausible. I have not read anything about it, but it would make sense. It's odd behavior. I do know, now this is going back to some reading I did probably 15 years ago, so take this with a grain of salt. But I do recall that there are some tribes in Africa that if you have tics, you end up elevated to a higher level within the tribe and you're sort of revered because they feel that so it's the other way. Instead of witchcraft, you have some magical powers. So I have read that, but I wouldn't be surprised if it goes the other way as well.
I like that better.
So do I.
That's definitely a less violent outcome for what we've had with witch hunts and witch burnings and stuff
that are
like
still going on in some countries.
That's something I've never considered because I mean that odd behavior would seem very out of place, and especially when we touched on the Catholic schools and possible demonic possession and stuff like that. I mean, I could totally see that happening and declaring it was a deal with the devil gone wrong, and therefore we burn her.
Yep, exactly.
Wow. This
is a great question. Great thought.
Great. This is I mean, it's a great thought, but like not a happy thought, but it's a great thought because it really opens up the door to so many other ideas.
So another interesting thing that sometimes comes up in talks is Mozart is thought to actually have Tourette syndrome. Of course, we can never diagnose him. We can't talk to him, but based on letters written about him and some of his letters that he has written about himself, they feel there's a fairly strong possibility that he had Tourette syndrome.
Okay. That's interesting. I remember, I think Brian Dunning from Skeptoid, he delved into his letters a little bit and trying to figure out what letters were actually from him and who weren't. I mean, because there's so much material.
Yeah. And that may be totally wrong what I just said, but that's
I don't know. I have no idea.
That was in the Tourette Canada literature years ago. So that's where I've got it from. That was my source at the time.
Is that considered a tic?
Oh, is what considered a tic?
Oh, wait. She had a question before that. Let's see. There you go. I don't have Tourette's, but I do have a disability. And when I'm concentrating or passionate about something, I hold my hands up and can only notice it if told or
to
stop
stop.
it with a very conscious effort. So is
Interesting.
that considered a tick?
Yeah, I don't know if it would be considered a tick. What that reminds me of is me and my grandmother have this thing that when we're really concentrating hard on something, we stick our tongue out. So it almost sounds like something like that, except yours is more extreme, right? That's
Yeah.
much more extreme.
Wow.
So it could be a tick. That would be a great thing to ask your doctor about, I think, because they
Yeah.
probably have a better idea, though it can be really, really difficult to sort of separate what is a habit, what is a tick. You know, those definitions can be very, very difficult. Same with obsessive compulsiveness with tics, because with obsessive compulsive disorder, one of the things that happens, for example, with Tourette syndrome, is they might think, I need to flip a light switch 5 times or it won't feel right. And the difference between that and somebody who has obsessive compulsive disorder by themselves, usually the person would go, I have to flip the light switch 5 times or my mother will die. So do you see the slight difference in the
Yeah.
thoughts?
It's
So
slight.
yeah.
Wow.
But is it a tick when they flip it 5 times because it has to feel right, or is it obsessive compulsive disorder? Because it
Right.
looks the same, right? It can be really hard to kind of parse those things apart. Bottom line is, we don't want you flipping the light switch 5 times every time you come into the classroom.
That's I mean, I have a habit, and I've called it a habit and like a superstition,
Mhm.
even though I don't believe in superstitions. I want to make that clear. But with technology, anytime I buy something, when I go to the store, I'm not ordering off of Amazon, but when I go to the store, I can never take the front box. Like whatever device
I
is in the
do the
box on the
same.
row on the shelf, I cannot take the first one. I have
Yeah.
to go back and take the second one because I'm always afraid, like, everyone has touched that box. They picked it up, they looked at it, it's probably broken, and I have to
Yes.
take the second one. So I've always put that up to just some stupid superstition
Yeah.
that has no basis in fact.
Yeah.
That's probably had like 2 experiences that has scarred me
That
for
feed
life.
into it. Yeah.
Yes. And
It's
I've
that
just done that.
confirmation bias. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I still do, even though I have such like I try to think critically, I do all this crap with skepticism stuff, but I still fall victim to that little paranoid kind of thing.
Yes.
But you know, it's cool.
And we all have, you know, that's the classic thing. People will say, "Oh, that's so OCD of me," right? But
Right.
and that is, you know, if you've talked spectrum, I mean, really, really low. That's just a normal human behavior. Someone with real OCD can't move. Like, they would not be able to pick the box up.
Wow.
So, you know, or get out of their house because they have to check something over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So it can become very, very debilitating. My oldest son had a lot of phobias, and he couldn't go into a room with anything metal, as in, I mean, certain metal things were fine, like big metal things were fine, but paper clips, keys, those types of things, he'd have to leave the room.
Wow.
And you're going to school?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So he took there was some pretty extensive therapy that happened at home and in the therapist's office, exposure and response again, and cognitive behavioral therapy. Remember I was stumbling on the words earlier? There they are. They just
Right.
came back.
Okay.
And, you know, and that's about the thought process. How rational is my thought? Not very.
Right.
Like, what's that paperclip really going to do? So he had to undergo that. It took about a year for him to overcome it. So that's the other thing that people don't understand is this doesn't happen in a month. It can be years. You know, it can be more
Right.
than years.
Right.
So depending on how old they are and how long they've let it go, that can be a factor. Also, just the straight up neurology. If you've got bad neurology, it can make it really, really, really difficult. And but the help, you know, there's a lot of evidence for exposure and response therapy and obsessive compulsive disorder or obsessive compulsive tendencies, which is what my kids had.
Wow. Okay, cool. I think we're done with the questions. Oh,
There's
good.
one more.
Yeah, Tim. What are your thoughts on Tourette's guy?
I don't know, Tourette's guy.
I don't know who that is either.
Can you explain, John?
Is that like a TikTok channel, or I mean,
Let me see.
there's a friend of mine that I know him through Facebook. I've been on. He does a podcast, but he has Tourette's, and he had told me beforehand, like, hey, just in case when you come on, you're gonna hear me do this woo sound, and that was his vocal tick.
Okay.
And during the interview, and I mean, he was cool with it. He embraced it. So he told me, like, don't worry about it, if you laugh or something, because
Yeah.
sometimes the timing was perfect.
Oh, it
where I
can
would
be.
give a response, and he's like, woo, woo. I was like, dude, that is awesome. Like, you make me feel so awesome because, like, I say something, you're like, woo.
Yeah, so it looks like Tourette's guy is a YouTube video series. So
I'll have to check that out.
TV series from 2004.
Oh,
I didn't even know about that. Look at that.
So one more thing, we're getting down to the end here. We got about 9 minutes left. That video that you had sent me, I do have it queued up. Do you want to watch it?
Sure.
You want to put it on? So you said what? It's about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And
I can set it up. Yeah. So remember I talked about Dr. Tamara Pringsheim. She's the neurologist here who is one of one of several neurologists who are at the Tourette clinic here. And this is a woman who agreed to be filmed to show what the tics look like. So you can actually see what somebody with Tourette syndrome looks like besides somebody who swears, and how it can be quite difficult. But it's an interview between Dr. Tamara Pringsheim and her patient.
Okay. So this is about 3 minutes. Everyone take a watch. Here we go.
So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the feelings you experience before you have a tic. Like what? So before you touch your stomach, what you feel inside and what doing the tic does for you.
So basically, before I tic, before I punch myself in the stomach, basically. I feel an urge that kind of build up in tension and an urge to move to make it go away, to make it stop. And when I do have that movement, I do feel the release momentarily.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives me the okay to say, okay, I've done the movement, the feeling, the urge, the tension is gone now.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of continuously, gradually builds up over and over and keep doing the same things to make it go away.
Yeah. How long do you think the relief is after you do it? Like how many seconds would you experience that for?
Probably only for a few seconds. And usually what will happen is if I do it enough, then I get the urge more and more, so that I try to move more and more to make it go away. So the relief is only felt for a few seconds, but it is a big relief from that tension. So things like that, I'll get it in another couple of seconds, and then it will build up. And if I try to hold it in, I can for a period of time, but then eventually I have to kind of let it out.
And you said that you've been able to suppress for periods, like if you, let's say you have a meeting or something like.
Oh, it went away. There's a problem with the video. Hold on. Nope, that's it.
Okay.
All right.
So it probably didn't load all the way for some reason, some error.
But that was
She saw most of
interesting.
it.
Yeah, I mean, it was very, like, when she did do the punch, she didn't even acknowledge it. It was almost like she was so used to it, it just happened, and there was no acknowledgement that it happened.
And one of the things that's very curious, and you probably noticed that when she stopped talking and she was listening to Dr. Pringsheim, all of a sudden a bunch of other tics came out.
Yes.
And so when you're engaged in something that you like to do or you're interested in, your tics do go down. And they can be non-existent in some cases.
Okay.
So, for example, my oldest son plays classical guitar. He doesn't have a single tic that I notice. I mean, he might have something clenching his stomach or something, but I certainly don't notice it.
Okay.
And I don't think he's too concentrated on his playing guitar. So it's a very interesting thing. And then when he stops, he'll probably start ticking again, just like she did when she stopped talking.
Right. That was great. That was a good example. Really good. All
and
right.
no verbal tics. Did you notice that too? They were all motion.
Right. All
But
motor.
all motor. And so she has some vocal tics, but she just didn't exhibit them on that particular video for whatever reason.
Okay.
Didn't happen. Cool.
All right. So we're at the end of our show. I had such a good time. I mean, it's one of those topics. It's totally out of my wheelhouse, which I love going. I love going out of my comfort zone and just learning, because I came into this knowing nothing, absolutely nothing. I mean, I did really, really quick. I looked at it, looked it up a little bit, but I was like, you know what? You've been doing this. Let's just all learn together. That's the point of the show. So I learned.
Thank you so much for having me, because any chance to kind of educate people about what it looks like and what it really is really awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
I would love to be able to go to one of these conferences you mentioned.
Yeah. They're amazing.
So if there's any like in my area that you know of, or the ones that you go to that travel around, let me know, because I'd love to go and maybe do like a video for Skeptical Inquirer. Traveling around and just talking to people. That would be so amazing.
That would be amazing. Actually, I know Tamara Pringsheim is talking about the possibility of a conference here in Calgary. You just have to come visit us.
Oh, all right. I'll come up to Canada.
Exactly.
Get myself some good maple syrup.
Yes.
Hang out with you, with everyone.
I do have rum.
Oh, well, I mean, that done deal. We're there. All right. Where can people find you if they want more information?
Oh boy, that's a really good thing. I haven't even. Talk about unprepared, huh?
Oh my goodness.
I know. You can find me on Facebook. That's easy.
Okay. Yeah.
Friend me on Facebook. I'll be happy to friend you. And I think that's probably the best place to find me. You can also actually find me at the Tourette. Let me get the link to that, because you can find some information about Tourette syndrome, which is really important, way more than I've given you here. You can find out about the TikTok tics and all kinds of the most recent research. And that is at the Tourette OCD Alberta Network. And I'll put the link in chat. Would that work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can, if you send it, are you going to send it right to me? Private chat?
I was going to do it myself, or is it best?
Absolutely.
Would that work?
Yeah, that's fine. That's great.
I should be able to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe not.
People can check
I'll send it to you.
All right, send it to me, and I will put it up there. We'll get it out to everyone, and that way they can look up some more information.
Exactly. It's a great site. Julian has done a fantastic job on it.
Awesome.
All right, so I put it in Messenger. It's there.
Messenger. There it is. Let me bring it up, and then I will.
And there's more videos of me if you want to learn about strategies for the classroom.
Oh, awesome.
And I believe there's stuff from psychologists about strategies for the home. So Melissa, you might be interested in some of the information there as well.
There you go. And I'm looking at you, Bob, a fellow teacher. So there's some stuff there you can use.
Yeah, for OCD and Tourette syndrome, both.
There you go. Awesome. All right, I'm going to do my announcements really quick. Stick around. Don't go anywhere, because they're short this time, because I don't have a lot to go into, except for Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. I do a show called Three Tortured Souls with Tim, who is still in the background, and Dave Schumacher. Tomorrow night, we are going to call some cursed phone lines. So check it out. See what happens. We might die. I don't know what'll happen, but we're going to have a few drinks. We're going to call these demonic party lines, and we'll see what happens. So it should be fun. And then the next thing I have is August 19th to 21st, which is next week. I'll be in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania for the Gettysburg Battlefield Bash. All proceeds go to the Pennsylvania Wounded Warriors and Kids with Cancer. It is a paranormal conference, but there's a lot more there. It's probably one of the most fun conferences I go to because we party all day, all night. It's just a lot of fun. I set up my Skeptical Help booth. The 3 Tortured Souls will be there. So Tim and Dave will be there. The 3 of us will be together. We're going to celebrate and broadcast our 100th show from the bash. Donna, who is not here because she abandoned me tonight to go to the Eagles game, she will be there with her Lucky Tiki Creations booth, selling all of her goodies. So check that out. And then my final event for the year so far is October 20th to 23rd. I'll be in Las Vegas, Nevada for SciCon, which is the SciCon 2022 official shirt. I got an early one. Actually, I stole it. I told Adrienne before the show, I stole this from the CFI offices directly. It's not available yet, but I was able to acquire one because I'm special and I was faster than the guy that had it. I literally snatched it from him and ran down the office. So this is the only one that you'll see right now until October. But if you have the means, please come on out because it's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. You get to learn. If you think this show is pretty much a preview of what you get at SciCon. Have you been to SciCon?
I've been once, 2018.
Okay.
My first year with GSoW, I met Rob Palmer at that time.
Oh, yeah, Rob.
And actually, I went to your workshop.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, you don't remember me?
Oh, of course I do. I met Rob there for the first time, too, even though he lives close to me. Like, he lives in Jersey, and he's not that far from me. We've actually done a couple projects together because of how close we are. Right. But that's the first time I met him, and it's a funny story. He loves to tell it, but I owed him a bottle of rum because Susan Gerbic interviewed me, and for some reason, she decided to put on the end of the interview, the first person that came up to me and mentioned the interview, I would give them a bottle of rum. And I was like, what? I didn't agree to that. But okay. But Rob was the first one. He came up.
That's really funny.
He's got it. So,
and I'm going this year. So
awesome. So we'll get to hang out.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I can't wait.
Looking forward to it.
So that's it for us. Everyone have a great weekend. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Be safe. And you stick around. Don't go anywhere because we're going to chat after the show. Okay. But everyone else, enjoy it. Be safe. And remember, never stop learning. Yes. And I'll see. Oh, no show next week. No Friday night show next week because I'll be in Gettysburg.
Great.
I'll probably be really drunk. So I won't be able to operate any of this machinery until Saturday when the other 2 guys are there to work with me. But okay, so with that, never stop learning. And I'll see you later.
Awesome.
Bye.